Welcome to IoT Real Talk. No fluff, no filler, just real pros talking about real programs, real challenges, and real results.
eSIM has long promised to simplify global IoT by allowing SIM profiles to be managed and switched over the air. But for many enterprises and operators, the reality is it's been anything but simple. The technology has been complex to deploy, costly to integrate, and difficult to apply across many IoT use cases. Now, SGP.32, the new eSIM standard for IoT, is designed to change all that. So what does SGP.32 actually do, and will it help eSIM live up to its promise? To answer these questions and more, we've invited IoT expert Ibraheem Kasujee, Senior Analyst at Analysys Mason, to join us on this episode of IoT Real Talk. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Susanna Song.
And I'm John Connett.
Hey, John. Good to see you again.
Likewise.
And welcome, Ibraheem.
Hi, Susanna. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be on.
Yeah, here at Eras, there's a lot of buzz around eSIM and the new standard .32. I would love to hear your take, Ibraheem, on what SGP.32 actually does or will do.
Yeah, sure. I guess maybe to start, if you go all the way back to what an eSIM is, I think rather confusingly, there's two definitions of eSIM. So for people talk about eSIM firstly as an embedded SIM. So, a SIM that is non-removable is soldered into the device. But when we talk about eSIM and around SGP.32, what we're really talking about is the second definition of a SIM that can be remotely managed. The profile can be switched over the air. And that's the part that's really interesting and kind of unlocks a lot of things in IoT that we're going to be talking about. And if you go back to eSIM, as in the definition we're talking about, it's been around for just over a decade or so. But when that eSIM first came about, just over a decade or so ago, it kind of defined in a way where it kind of worked, but not to its full potential. A couple of areas where the actual process of switching the SIM, of managing the profiles, was quite complex, and quite expensive. The way the kind of back-end architecture was designed, there was a bit of lock-in to your operator. So this new SGP.32 has come around in the last couple of years to try and address some of those limitations of where the original eSIM was. And the idea is that by removing some of those roadblocks, it should hopefully open up eSIM to a much broader range of use cases across the IoT market.
So it's fair to say, Ibrahim, that despite the fact that eSIM has been around for quite some time, it really hasn't met the expectations that I think maybe the promise would have suggested in the market. You touched on this a little bit, but can you maybe elaborate a little bit more about what it is about the current or past implementations of eSIM that have really inhibited adoption?
Yeah, so before SGP.32, there were kind of two flavors of eSIM. So firstly, there's a consumer eSIM, which is designed for a mobile phone, for a tablet, where there's a human user behind it. And the ways that it's usually activated, there's different ways through a QR code, through an app on your phone. When it comes to an IoT device, firstly, a lot of them, they may not even have a user interface, a screen. And in almost all cases, they're not going to have a person behind the controlling the device. So the other alternative was this M2M eSIM, which is designed for IoT devices to be operated over the air, where you have a whole batch of devices at once. So, let's take a use case like fleet management, where an enterprise might have trucks and maybe thousands, tens of thousands of them spread around the country or across countries. So, if you want to make any changes to the SIM, to the connectivity behind that, it's just not feasible to send someone in person wherever those devices may be. So being able to do that remotely over the air is what eSIM is designed for. What we found in practice is the way that the M2M, the original eSIM, was architected, is quite complex in terms of the back-end process. So there are different components, and one of the components, a thing called an SMSR, which is controlled by the actual operator, the connectivity provider. And every time you wanted to do a profile switch, you have to create some integrations between operator A and operator B. And that process was quite expensive and quite kind of complex to do. So in practice, we found that eSIM was applied in a few use cases, particularly automotive, which was kind of the one which really drove eSIM in the first place. But for smaller enterprises or where there were more constraints to the device, eSIM didn't really work in practice and often made it difficult for enterprises to actually adopt it.
Yeah, so Ibrahim, then what changes for enterprises with this new standard?
Yeah, so I think there's two big things which have changed. The first thing is that process I talked about the kind of lock-in to the operator of the integration required to their platform. So that component, which is called the SMSR, that's now gone away. We now have a new component called the EIM, which is the eSIM IoT Remote Manager. And the idea behind it is you're no longer that process of switching the profile is no longer controlled or dependent on the two operators that you're switching the profile for. So if you're an enterprise, you now have much more control over the process. So the EIM, it may be provided by the original operator, it may be provided by a third-party provider, it may even be controlled by the enterprise themselves. So they have much more control over that process. It's no longer as kind of complex and costly to actually perform the profile switch as it was in the past. So I think that's the first change is to be frank, it's going to be much more simpler and easier to actually make it work. The second part, yeah, go ahead, John.
No, I was just going to ask, and it sounds like it's also going to have a pretty significant impact on the value chain, particularly the SIM value chain, because you're no longer necessarily going to be required to buy the SIM directly from the operator. You could theoretically buy a .32 SIM from anybody, as long as we can bootstrap, and then you can localize it, assuming you have control or a supplier that you are working with has control of the EIM. You can localize that on any operator that has you have a commercial relationship with. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And I think that really just opens up a lot of flexibility for ultimately the end user, for device manufacturers. So kind of one of the things that an eSIM enables is, if you're manufacturing a device in your factory, you can fit the eSIM in. You can have a kind of blank profile, what we call the bootstrap profile, and you may not know at the point of manufacture where exactly that device is going to end up. But with the eSIM, you have the ability to put the eSIM in. You can ship the device out, and then wherever that device ends up, wherever it wakes up, you can switch the profile at that time to make sure you have the right connectivity wherever the device ends up and what it needs. So you get a lot more flexibility for the actual enterprise. Once
Yeah,
the device is actually out there.
massive simplification, certainly from a manufacturing standpoint. I don't need to even have my final operator chosen theoretically. I can have essentially a single SKU with any eSIM, and then localize that as I choose based on where I want to ship those devices. So to me, it feels like it's more than just hey, it allows me to switch. It's actually, I think, a much broader change in the ecosystem beyond just which can I move from operator A to B. It's a significant simplification. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I think we can touch on the actual thing of moving your whole IoT estate from operator A to operator B. I don't think that's really where the value comes in. I think it's really about having the ability to switch between profiles, to have the flexibility. So I mean, one example is around permanent roaming, which is a big challenge in IoT. There are countries around the world, like Brazil, like Turkey, along the Middle East, where IoT devices aren't allowed to roam. And this is something that eSIM is a really neat solution to this. Of once your device ends up in that country, you can then switch to a localized profile, and then your device is compliant and able to stay and be active in those countries. So I think as an enterprise, you can be much more confident that your device is going to work wherever it ends up.
Interesting. And kind of you just touched on it with the permanent roaming, but what are some other more specific IoT applications where this new capability really becomes invaluable?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different areas. I think one is kind of related to that use case I mentioned of where say you're a global manufacturer of devices, and your devices are getting shipped out all around the world. So having that flexibility of at the point of manufacture, you can put your eSIM in, and then wherever your device ends up, you can be ensured it has the right connectivity. So I think that's one use case. I think a second thing, which is the second area where SGP32 has kind of been designed and improved on the original specification, is around low power or constrained devices. So this is one of the limitations of the original M2M eSIM. Was it didn't work very well for very low power battery constrained devices. There's been some tweaks made to the specification to make it more suitable to those devices. So just an example, so if you take NB-IoT, which is a very low power protocol, basically it wasn't possible to put an eSIM EUICC into NB-IoT under the old specification, but now that is possible. So there are a whole range of IoT use cases which are very low power, be it things like smart metering, sensing in smart cities, temperature monitoring, smart buildings, smart agriculture. Well, the whole range of these IoT use cases where they're consuming tiny amounts of data, where optimizing the battery life is super important. And before putting an eSIM in there would really use up our battery and take out some of the advantages that you want in having that really long battery lifespan. So HB32, that's one of the areas where it's a somewhat significant improvement, and a lot of those low power use cases now should be suited to eSIM.
Yeah, it seems like there are a lot of upside for enterprises. But what about for operators and service providers, connectivity providers?
I think, there are different ways of looking at it. I think for a while, I think operators kind of looked at eSIM as a threat and something to be kind of wary of is this a way that it's going to lead to customers being able to easily switch from us to a competitor. Now, I think in practice that isn't really the case, and there's still a lot of hurdles to moving your entire IoT estate from one provider to another. But I think there are a lot of ways. There are many opportunities that would come from eSIM. I think firstly, just in terms of opening up the market to some of these use cases that we mentioned, having enterprises having a lot more flexibility and being able to really help them scale some of their use cases where previously they had challenges in being connected in certain countries when the devices are crossing borders and losing connectivity. Um, Being able to make sure that the connectivity is less of a bottleneck is going to help those enterprises to scale, and that's going to bring benefits to the connectivity provider themselves. And I think there are also other opportunities to, I think the point John made is really important about the value chain evolving, and with that comes opportunities for the connectivity providers to, do more than just be selling data. And I think eSIM management, there's going to be a new kind of role for someone in the value chain of a kind of eSIM orchestrator, someone who's going to manage the complexity of eSIM, or the processing, the background of the underlying connectivity, managing the eSIM profiles, managing the platforms behind it. There's a role for an operator in being a trusted provider of managing the eSIM and the connectivity underneath it. So I think there's a role there. There's an opportunity for operators to really embrace that orchestration role and turn it into something they can monetize and ultimately help the enterprise end user.
Yeah, that's interesting. So they kind of closes some doors, but opens some other doors from an operator perspective. I mean, do you see this? I know there's concern from the operators over lock-in and kind of not having that and not being able to count on a device being, you know, uh, on an operator for 10 years obviously changes some of the economics, both in terms of the profitability, but also in terms of the pricing, right? If I can't guarantee that this thing is going to be here for 10 years and I'm getting that revenue stream, the price I can give you up front, the profitability, the whole thing, the whole P&L of that model kind of changes. How do you see um, the economics for the operator potentially changing? Will this drive more commoditization? Will this drive lower pricing, or is there a floor because operators aren't going to be able to sell you something today that's at a super discount, assuming that their costs will be mitigated and they'll make the revenue up, down the line for a, many year long deployment.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the IoT market, there's been a lower pricing pressure already, which has been sustainable for a few years. So operators have had this problem for a while. I think there is still a bit more room for prices to fall a little bit more. So there is going to be something to think about there for operators. But I think there is going to be a floor eventually in how far prices can fall. But I think for operators, I think there's a perspective they can take if it's an opportunity to try and redefine their role and look beyond selling data. Think about what are the other ways we can add value to the enterprise, be it security, be it the orchestration, the platforms, the data analytics. Um, Ultimately, as a connectivity provider, if the connectivity really becomes fully commoditized, the onus is on you to add value in other ways. So yeah, I think there will be a bit of change there coming from the operators. But yeah, I think that's kind of part where the market's going, and there's a way for operators to respond to make sure they're positioned well.
And so I guess just switching now from the operator point of view, and more from to a customer perspective. Um, I mean, do we think the new standard will really help eSIM live up to its promises for the end user, for the enterprise?
I think it's definitely going to be an improvement on where we are today. So, some of those limitations that were there with eSIM, kind of bugbears that's been there for a while that the people wanted to address. A lot of been work in listening to some of those concerns and addressing it. So I think ultimately it will become less complex. We will see actual implementation of eSIM and being able to switch to profiles. Um, so I think to that end, there will be an improvement. And I think the second piece about being suited to low power devices, I think there is going to be a big change because there are a lot of IoT devices or space for the market out there which have kind of been shut out from eSIM. So it will be opened up a little bit more. I think having said that, I think you know we do have a tendency in the IoT market to kind of get very excited about new technology and sometimes overpromise on what it can achieve. Uh, so I think we need to make sure that customers are kind of aware of why exactly does SGP.32 make sense? What are the benefits it can bring me? Um, but at the same time, IoT is still a very complex market, and there's still a lot of other challenges for enterprises to deal with. But it's definitely a step in the right direction.
What are you hearing from the market? Are enterprises eager to adopt this new standard? What have you heard from enterprises?
I think there is a lot of interest, kind of across the board. I think I've heard a lot of interest. A lot of enterprises, device manufacturers are asking the providers, what's going on with HTTP 32, what's the strategy, what do we need to know? I think there's a lot of interest in, there's kind of I think a lot of enterprises have a kind of vague understanding. They've kind of heard about it and now they want to know, what does it actually mean for us and, what can it deliver? So I think there is interest. It's still quite early days in terms of the actual implementation. So there's going to be a period of enterprises getting used to it, seeing how it works in practice. But I think the interest is quite strong. And I think there are enterprises of different sizes, maybe who haven't had much time to implement eSIM before, or there are specific verticals or use cases where it hadn't worked. So I think there's definitely interest in seeing it and yeah, trying to actually realize some of those benefits which they may have heard about, but not actually have the chance to experience.
Yeah, very interesting. I can just tell you from my experience, a lot of excitement, obviously around SGP.32. As you mentioned, we tend to get overexcited about new technologies in the IoT space, but this feels a little bit different. This feels like there's a recognition, I think, across everyone in the ecosystem that this is going to actually drive a significant change beyond just kind of the surface level, SIM management. Broader business model changes, broader ecosystem changes. I think it's still to be seen, kind of how things sort themselves out. The SIM vendors are going to play kind of a new role, a different role in many cases. I think there's definitely going to be more space for somebody to act as that eSIM orchestrator. I think that's going to be a critical role. I think some enterprises are going to do that themselves. They're going to want to, just like in the past world, you had auto OEMs controlling the SMSR themselves. I think in the new world with .32, you'll continue to see some of those larger enterprises with bigger IoT programs kind of want to control the mechanisms themselves. But I definitely think there's going to be a role for eSIM orchestration. I know here at Eris, that's something that we're aggressively working to enable on our platform. This feels like a pretty an inflection point, I guess, is what I would say. So really looking forward to see how these changes bear fruit over the next couple of years.
Yeah, one last question. You talk about the market just starting to adopt this new standard. Obviously, existing devices will remain on the older standards. Are you seeing this now rapidly being available commercially, or do you see it kind of taking a slower time to roll out?
I think it'll take a bit of time. I think the last few months you're starting to see real progress being made. I think there's a process of, firstly, the SIM vendors have to get their products in. They have to get themselves kind of certified by the GSMA. Then the operators and connectivity providers have to get it set up on their end. And then it's got to feed through to the actual chipsets, the devices. So that process takes a bit of time, but I think there's been a lot of activity in the last few months, and I think it really ramp up over the next 12 months or so, where, I think before long, most providers out there will be supporting it, have it in place, and then enterprises can get their hands on it. So maybe a bit of time over the next few months or so, and then I think it'll ramp up from there.
All right. John, any last comments?
No, I think, Ibrahim, very insightful commentary. It's like I said a few minutes ago, I think this is going to be a broader change in the market beyond just kind of the SIM inner workings. I think this is going to fundamentally change how operators do business in IoT. I think this is going to open up new roles for them and also open up new roles and possibilities for others. Beyond just kind of the eSIM orchestration and management, given the flexibility that this provides at that kind of front end of the value chain, as we talked about with the manufacturing example, the person that's providing the eSIM and the initial connectivity, that bootstrap, that can be, that's a role to play that can be, completely new dynamic versus what we see today. Obviously, it creates new opportunity with a lot of existing applications and use cases, and I think it will open up new use cases and applications that in IoT that maybe haven't existed because of some of the barriers that have existed thus far. So time will tell. We'll see. But Ibrahim, appreciate your insight on the market space here.
No, great. Thanks. Great speaking to you.
All right. Well, thank you again. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in. If you have questions for Ibraheem, John, or myself, feel free to email us at podcast@eris.net or leave a comment. And if you have a question or topic that you'd like John and I to discuss on the next episode, we want to know. So don't be a stranger. Send us an email and leave us a comment below. Until next time, I'm Susanna Song.
And I'm John Conant, and this is IoT Real Talk.
From all of us at Eris, thank you for listening to IoT Real Talk. We hope you'll join us again for more real stories from real practitioners shaping the future of IoT. Tune in on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, or visit eris.com/IoT podcast.